Welcome. At last count, the earthquake that struck Nepal last Saturday has killed more than 4,000 people. Plane loads of aid arrive each day from a dozen countries, but the population remains in danger from aftershocks and a shortage of water. In our region, the tragedy is felt most strongly in the Nepalese community. In a moment, we'll learn about this and an organization which helps Nepalese immigrants to settle here. Also on the program, the controversial Trans-Pacific Trade Bill, which President Obama is championing. He has broad support from Republicans. Also on the program, East New York, the long-struggling Brooklyn neighborhood where half the people live below the poverty line. It's trying to climb back with a business incubator that sees artists as key entrepreneurs. In our public intellectual segment, we examine a study which concludes that growing First Amendment protections for corporations, think Citizens United, are bad for business as well as democracy. And towards the end of the broadcast, old-fashioned tweeting, a virtual birdwalk through Central Park in this busy migration season. First, the Nepalese community here in New York. It's larger than you might think. Some 5,000 now live just in Queens. Many gathered at a vigil in Jackson Heights this weekend for prayer and to fundraise for disaster relief back home. Joining us now, Luna Ranjit, the co-founder and executive director of Adhikaar, an organization that assists Nepalese immigrants. It's based in Woodside, Queens. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Is Woodside kind of little Kathmandu, should I call it that?
Yeah, Woodside, Jackson Heights neighborhood is become little Nepal, really. It's not just Kathmandu. We have people from all over the country who are now settled here.
And so it must be a horrible time in that community. Probably all 5,000 people know somebody affected in one way or another by this earthquake?
We have much more than 5,000. Unfortunately, the census data does not truly capture the number of people.
What would you say?
And, we estimate about 50,000 in New York City.
Okay.
So, most of whom are in Queens. And a lot of us are very new immigrants here. Many of us have come in the last 10, 15 years. So everyone has family members back home. And so,
how is communication at this point?
It's been very sporadic. In some neighborhoods, we're able to connect. Mostly in Kathmandu, it's been okay, but even in parts of Kathmandu, I have not been able to talk to my family members since the first day. I established that they were okay, but since then, I've not been able to connect. But with others, we have been able to get through. But outside Kathmandu, it's been really, really difficult. So we don't even know the full impact of this yet.
Most of our viewers know so little about Nepal. Mm-hmm. Has this come as a great shock to the people there, or is it an earthquake-prone area like, say, California is known to be in this country?
Mm-hmm. So Nepal is on the fault line. The mountains that Nepal is known for were caused by the coming together of those two big land masses. And so we've always known that this is an earthquake-prone area. We've felt tremors on and off. And the last big earthquake was 81 years ago. And for the 10, 15 years, we've been talking about another one is due anytime. Of course, there's no way we could predict when or where it would hit, but we've known that something was happening.
As they know in California, too, the little tremors don't necessarily predict a bigger tremor being around the corner and then out of the blue. Sure. One day it can hit. You talked about the mountains that Nepal is known for. Mount Everest, the famous Mount Everest, is there, and those are some of the people affected, both guides, local people who work and live around Everest, as well as some of the hikers from all over the world.
True, including some Americans.
Indeed. Yeah. Is the construction in Nepal earthquake-proof? Again, in California, they talk so much, they take such great pains to figure out what kind of architecture, what kind of construction standards are needed to make it as safe as possible if people are going to continue to live there. How about in Nepal?
The safety standards are fairly lax in Nepal, so it depends what you're talking about. We're mostly concerned about the urban areas where high-rises were going up. there have been a massive destruction, but actually from what little I've seen, it's the smaller houses have gone, the older houses and temples have gone, but many of the high-rises are still standing. So I am not an expert on this, and so I can't speak authoritatively on this issue.
That's incredible. It's so counterintuitive if that's the case, that the high-rises are still standing, but many low-rise, more ordinary homes and other buildings collapsed. I guess that probably speaks to the standards of construction that the people with enough money to build a high-rise have adhered to.
Or what I had heard before was that the high-rises are apartment complexes and there's more stringent regulation, whereas other mid-rises are individual homes. So that might be one of the reasons as well. But when we speak about Nepal, Nepal is much more than Kathmandu, and in the villages there are small homes as well, which have they've been flooding, there have been landslides, and so a lot of different reasons why houses have gone.
Tell us about your organization here in New York. What do you do normally?
So on a day-to-day basis, we work with Nepali-speaking immigrants, so people from Nepal, India, Tibet, Bhutan, and Burma as well, mostly who trace our ancestry back to Nepal, or Tibetan and Bhutanese refugees who have lived in Nepal and have come here. We work around basic, like settling into a new country, of learning a new language, learning about the resources, and also we organize for social justice issues. We organized for labor rights. When our members don't get paid, we make sure that those stolen wages are recovered. And we've also worked on policy level. Domestic workers' Bill of Rights was one of the issues that we worked on that we were successful in. And we were just preparing for a press conference on Friday for nail salon workers' bill at the City Hall. And so right now we're trying to figure out how much energy to focus on the crisis that we have to manage right now, and how much to then focus on the long-term ongoing work that Adhikaar has to do with workers' rights, access to health care, immigrant rights issues.
Indeed. So what is your involvement with the crisis?
So we've sort of become an information hub for a lot of our community, both people who wanted to just be around each other and try to figure out if they can connect with family members. A lot of our members are from outside Kathmandu, so they're still not able to make contact. They've heard or seen news that their villages have been wiped away, but they have not been able to connect. So we've been trying to help contact family members, and we've also quickly started just collecting donations. So a lot of people reached out and were asking how they could help, and one of the things that we really, really need right now is money to be able to support the relief efforts that's happening there. And we've been in constant communication with people on the ground there who've been doing volunteer work.
And money donated to your organization could help with the relief effort, or are people better off for this donating to some of the international medical organizations?
Both are needed. The money that is coming to our organization is going directly to the people who are doing volunteer work, but they're also small, they're doing it on their own, whereas larger organizations like Doctors Without Borders have much more expertise, and they're providing a different set of expertise. I feel like both are needed in their own ways.
Is immigration status a big issue in the community in Queens? Are there many people who are undocumented from Nepal?
There is a sizable population of our community that is undocumented or in various stages of temporary visas.
Because I remember that after the earthquake in Haiti, President Obama ordered TPP, temporary protected status, for any Haitian who was here before the quake. Even if they were undocumented, they were then, in effect, legalized here in this country. Are you going to ask the federal government for the same thing for Nepalese?
We have already started the process for TPS. We spoke with Congressman Crowley and Congresswoman Meng's office, and they have they have circulated a letter to their colleagues to urge Secretary of State and Secretary of Homeland Security to support TPS for the Nepali citizens.
And the rationale is there's such bad conditions at home that it would be cruel to force people to go en masse.
Definitely. I mean, the country is completely devastated. The quick estimates are that it will take $5 billion to until we have recovery. So it's a really, I can't even wrap my head around that number right now.
I can't even imagine either.
But with TPS, there's also a bill that Congressman Al Green from Texas and Mike Honda from California have drafted a bill.
So briefly, how can people help?
So right now, immediately, money is a big issue. Please donate generously, whatever you can. Please donate money and not goods at this time, because we really don't know what exactly is needed and how the transportation is happening. We have people in Nepal, in India, and other places who are figuring out those things, and it's much easier to send material from the region rather than send it from here. So please donate money, and then for our TPS, please call on your congresswomen to sign on to the letter that Congressman Crowley and Congresswoman Meng have been circulating.
Thank you for coming in today, and good luck to everyone in the Nepalese community.
Thank you for your support, Brian.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is in Washington this week to deliver the first speech to Congress from a Japanese head of state since World War II. At this moment in history, the leaders of Japan and the U.S. are on the same page. Shinzo Abe and Barack Obama are both intent on passing an international trade treaty called the TPP, the 12-Nation Trans-Pacific Partnership. The pact would lift trade barriers among countries that border the Pacific Ocean, from Chile to Vietnam. But it's controversial, with provisions that critics fear will undermine American labor, environmental, and internet standards. Here is President Obama championing the TPP in the State of the Union message.
But as we speak, China wants to write the rules for the world's fastest growing region. That would put our workers and our businesses at a disadvantage. Why would we let that happen? We should write those rules. We should level the playing field. That's why I'm asking both parties to give me trade promotion authority to protect American workers with strong new trade deals from Asia to Europe that aren't just free, but are also fair. It's the right thing to do.
Since that speech, critics have grabbed the spotlight, arguing against the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, as well as another controversial part called TPA, Trade Promotion Authority. TPA would give the president the fast-track authority he was asking Congress to grant him in that clip we just watched. It would move the treaty through Congress quickly and limit lawmakers' ability to make changes in the pact. As a result of those limitations and other reasons, some Democrats have jumped ship, including New York Senator Chuck Schumer.
I have been in the Congress 35 years. Every trade agreement we talk about enforcement, we get virtually none. None. We don't get labor enforcement. We don't get environment enforcement. We don't get all the enforcement we're talking about. And that's why the deck is so stacked against us. It just doesn't work on a multilateral basis. Other countries, particularly China, the most rapacious, not involved in this agreement, and I agree with the geopolitical goal of getting these countries in our orb, not China's, although that's not equal to me of middle-class incomes going up or down. That's why I'm on the other side. But China just doesn't abide by these agreements.
Senator Chuck Schumer. So in terms of trade, what's right for America? Joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. TPP supporter Bill Reinsch, president of the National Foreign Trade Council, a business advocacy group, and a critic of the trade pact, is with us as well. Fordham Law professor and author of Corruption in America, Zephyr Teachout. You may remember her for her race against Governor Cuomo in the Democratic primary last fall. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Well, Bill Reinsch, I'll give you the first word here, since Chuck Schumer just made the case against. You worked in the Clinton administration, I believe. Make the case for. I guess Chuck Schumer changed since the 90s, you not so much.
Well, the world has changed. It's a global world, global supply chains, everybody makes everything everywhere. We are a mature, slow growth economy. 3% a year is good for us. 95% of the world's consumers are outside the United States. If we want to grow, if we want to grow jobs, if we want to improve incomes, we need to export, we need to trade, and these agreements will do that. They're about market access, they're about rules and developing a rules-based trading system that is going to be helpful to developed countries like the United States. And Senator Schumer's comments about China were well taken. China poses a problem for the world trading system in many respects, and for us. But I think the solution is agreements that hopefully they'll come into eventually. They're not one of the negotiating parties right now, but agreements that they'll come into that will have rules that will be sort of rule of law rules, that will protect intellectual property, that will provide strong environmental, health, safety, and labor standards. And if they want to come in, they'll have to adhere to them. I think that's good for us. Also happens to be good for them.
Zephyr Teachout, this is the second consecutive Democratic administration. The first one was Bill Clinton, where there's this alignment of a Democratic president and the Republicans in Congress for free trade agreements, and the Democrats in Congress are opposed. So, as an opponent, what's up with the Democratic presidents? Why would they be wrong on this?
Can I just step back for a second and
Sure.
say what I see this doing? Because it's called a free trade deal. First of all, we don't know what's in the deal. The secrecy is part of the problem. But second, for as far as we can tell, of the 29 different parts of the deal, only 5 of them deal with trade, tariff, the traditional trade elements. And this is what is concerning to me, not as a Democrat, not as a New Yorker, but as a citizen and a historian, is that it actually really upsets the basic lawmaking function and takes it out of the U.S. Congress and puts it into secret international bodies making decisions about U.S. law. So, for instance, there are provisions that would sort of set ceilings and floors on what we can do with patents, with intellectual property, with environmental regulations. And that's really concerning if you believe in democracy itself. And so you might have heard a Pulitzer Prize winner, Joe Stiglitz, say this isn't about trade. And what he means is it's really about power. It's about taking power away from people, away from Congress, and giving it to trade negotiations that we aren't a part of.
Bill, you want to respond to that?
Sure. One of the great ironies of this debate is this secrecy issue. And it puts those proponents in an awkward position. What Zephyr is saying is essentially, we don't know what's in the agreement. It's a big secret, but it's bad. And here's why. Well, if you don't know what's in it, it seems to me it's premature to say that go into details.
But if you don't know what's in it and you're not going to know what's in it, then why should Americans in a democracy support anything like that?
They will know what's in it, and let's not conflate two different things. The debate the Congress is going to have, hopefully next week, is not about the TPP agreement. It's not about a specific agreement. It's about the process by which Congress will consider agreements going forward. When there is an agreement, if there is one, there will be plenty of time for Congress to consider it. The documents will all be public. It will be out there. People can debate it. Nothing new. We've been doing this for 50 years.
But this procedural bill that you're talking about would take away the ability of Congress to change it once it's submitted. But Zephyr Teachout, why is that a bad thing? If every country, and there are, I guess, 13 involved in these negotiations, had to then submit the treaty to their legislatures, those that even have legislatures, and then come back and renegotiate and relitigate every little thing, then, no country would ever sign any treaty, it sounds like.
Well, that's not true. In fact, the vast majority of trade deals are done with that process that you're talking about. And this new kind of authority, this fast-track authority, was invented by Richard Nixon in 1974. And then up until NAFTA, it was in place, and then only has been in place for 5 years since then. So it's not actually the norm or the default in the way we do trade. And I actually think this is really important because it's something akin to a constitutional amendment. If you look at the creation of the Constitution, the founders were quite committed to having Congress have authority over the content of treaties and trade deals. And the president would do the negotiating, but the responsive representative body, Congress, would be responsible for the substance of it. What Fast Track effectively does is shift that power. So it is like a constitutional amendment, I think very worrying because of that. So after it is secretly, privately negotiated, there's only 90 days to consider it. No amendments are possible, and there's limited public debate, which is actually kind of astounding.
So, Bill, what do you think of Zephyr's arguments?
There's nothing fast about Fast Track. Once the agreement is formally sent to Congress, sure, there's a clock that ticks, and the 90 days she was talking about goes into effect. But the period of time between when the agreement is actually concluded, that is when they finish negotiating it, and the time when it's submitted is elastic. There is no time limit. And in fact, there's a great deal of discussion that goes on. The agreement goes up to Congress. There are hearings, there are discussions. There have even been cases going back to the 70s when an agreement was essentially modified by the negotiators because things happened. It became obvious that Congress wasn't going to approve it.
But they can't modify it this time, right? That was part of Zephyr's point about what's different from now since the Nixon era.
No, it's no different. It's the same. They can't modify it once the president sends it up, but that's a formality. Before it's set up, if Congress has a lot of concerns, and they'll know what's in it at that point, they can and have in the past expressed those concerns. And in at least one case that I remember, the negotiators went back and renegotiated. So there are opportunities to do this. It's not, it's not a up or down set piece. It's a much more complicated process than that.
Can I step back even further and ask, why should there be tariffs if this is ultimately about tariffs and protecting U.S. manufacturers of things from competition from other countries? I think that's the basic notion of what so-called free trade is supposed to be about. Why should there be tariffs, taxes on anything coming into this country for consumers here from another country? Or is that the heart of your argument?
No, the heart of my argument is about this particular, what we know, and I wish we knew more, we know very little, is about this particular agreement that is masquerading as a trade deal but has many other non-trade components. I'm deeply concerned, for instance, as is the Sierra Club and the NRDC and most major environmental groups, that this might actually limit our own ability to regulate in the environmental arena. I'm deeply concerned, as are environmental groups and labor groups, about the authority it gives even more companies to bring suits against the federal government, against states for trying to pass environmental protections. We've already seen some of these suits, and everybody expects the floodgates will open. And the problem with these suits, again, I'm going to come at this as a constitutional lawyer, is that they take lawmaking decisions outside of Article 3 tribunals and put them in these tribunals that are made up of private lawyers, many of whom have actually previously been lobbyists for these big multinational corporations. So it's really restructuring law and restructuring power in some fundamental ways.
Bill, can you argue, what's interesting in the contrast between what President Obama says and what Chuck Schumer says, Schumer got turned off since the 90s. Obama says he used to be opposed to free trade because of all the labor and environmental problems with it. This is not that, this is not your grandfather's free trade agreement. That's basically the president's argument. Can you say that there are better labor and environmental standards here to protect the workers in this country and protect the global environment than those in the past? Because you hear Zephyr's concern.
I do. It's a good concern. I mean, I don't have the text either. You know, the business community doesn't have an inside track, despite what some of the opponents say. I think it's the administration's intention to negotiate better labor, environmental, health, and safety standards, and I take them at their word. You know, I believe the president wants to do that, and we'll judge the product when it comes out. On the larger point she's making, I would just say, you know, the agreements are different now because trade is different now. When I was her age, trade was simple. You made it here and you shipped it over there. It was an export, or they made it over there and shipped it here. It was import. End of story. Now we have global supply chains. Everything is made everywhere. You know, an automobile assembly will go back and forth across the U.S.-Canada border 6 or 7 times before it's finished. In that kind of a world, non-tariff barriers, safety standards, inspections, things like that, intellectual property theft or protection become much, much more important. And any competent trade agreement is going to try to address those problems in addition to tariffs. Now, Zephyr also didn't mention on the tariff side, I think, Brian, you made a very good point. Tariffs are a tax. And the way our tariff schedule is structured, the highest tariffs, meaning the highest taxes, are on cheap stuff. So the highest tariffs are on, for example, shoes, sneakers that cost less than $3, on T-shirts, on apparel. So the brunt of non-free trade falls on poor people. And one of the things this agreement will do, I think, is lower some of those taxes.
I'd like to see that $3 pair of sneakers, but Zephyr,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I also think the world is different than it was 20 years ago, but the biggest difference is that we now know that the promises that were made before NAFTA about NAFTA were not fulfilled. And you know, you could be sympathetic in '94. I was opposed to NAFTA then. It was sort of one of my first political moments right out of college. But you could be sympathetic to the theory of NAFTA. But in practice, what NAFTA has done is destroyed both American and Mexican jobs. It's increased our trade deficit. It hasn't worked the way it was promised. And in as much as, you know, some commentators talk about this as NAFTA on steroids, Americans don't like what NAFTA has done, and so we shouldn't like a NAFTA on steroids moving forward.
We are out of time, I'm sorry to say. Viewers, you've heard and seen part of both arguments. Somebody has to have the last word. This time it's going to be her. And so we thank you both for having this debate. Viewers, you'll make up your own mind. You've heard some of both sides on TPA and TPP. Thank you both very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
The de Blasio housing program targets underdeveloped neighborhoods for rezoning and more density to build more apartment buildings. But for whom and under whose definition of progress? Some active locals in one of these places say they will revitalize their neighborhood from within. This is East New York, Brooklyn, the first of 15 neighborhoods the de Blasio administration plans to rezone to expand affordable housing. The group Arts East New York, with support from the city's Economic Development Corporation, is taking over vacant lots before developers do, installing art and small business incubators. The project, Renew Lots, took off last week with 10 businesses and 4 artists at New Lots Avenue and Snedeker Avenue. And with us now is Catherine Green, the founder of Arts East New York. Hi.
Hi.
Did I say that right? Renew Lots?
You got it. Renew
Lots. The New Lots section.
Absolutely.
So are you for or against what the administration is doing?
Oh, we're excited. We're excited about the development that's going to come to East New York, but we just want it to happen with the community residents at the table. We want to be a part of the conversation. We want to be a part of the change, and we do not want to see a displacement. Although we know it may happen, we want to see as little of that as possible.
Is that a big risk? The de Blasio administration continually says, we're going to work with communities on all of these things. We're against gentrification the way that it has been done, but we need to build to create more affordable housing.
Yes, it's a challenge, and what he set out to do is extremely ambitious, and we are, again, very excited about working with the administration. Just today, I'm coming from City Hall. We sat down with the mayor, the deputy mayor's office, with a group of cohorts. We're called the East New York Community Coalition. We've met, we've been meeting together, and we are actively working with city agencies along with the mayor's office to make sure that these changes have the voice of the community at the table.
Tell us about the grand opening, and we'll watch a little video.
Sure. The grand opening was an incredible day. We were able to launch a project that has been in the works for about 2 years, along with the Economic Development Corporation of New York City. And it's an incredible opportunity to have 10 entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, have a first chance at a storefront, and then also 4 artists who are from in or around the community and working with youth and community members to install public art projects in the East New York community.
All right, let's see a little video from Arts East New York.
So this is the arcade, and we are 2 printmakers here. Our GoFundMe is up and running, GoFundMe.com, the arcade1, and you can help donate to help us get equipment and have the space so that we can help and bring printmaking to East New York.
Okay, well, it's CW Star Bling, interchangeable bling for so many things. You bring it out here, change it based on your mood.
This shop here is called Made in African, my brand. It's bridging the gap between Brooklyn and Africa. It's a concept mediating the 2 aesthetics of African formal and Brooklyn culture into one, and that's how you get the whole brand Made in Africa.
So is that still up?
Yes, it is. Yes, we'll be there every day, Monday through Friday, 10 to 9 p.m., and then Saturday and Sunday, 11 to 7.
So that was on a formerly vacant lot, yeah. And it's kind of a pop-up art space?
Correct.
And you're hoping that's going to be the ground floor of a building at some point?
Yes, we are hoping. We're working with a development company who is coming after us to secure brick and mortar storefronts for some of the successful vendors. It would be like their graduation from this space into a brick and mortar.
So this is like the opposite of what some people in the wealthier parts of Brooklyn are going through right now, right? Where they're saying, please, please, no more, no more.
Right, absolutely. What we're trying to do is make sure that the community residents have a first chance at whatever opportunities come into the neighborhood. So when this opportunity came to, when we were made aware of the RFP from EDC, we jumped at this opportunity. We had already been doing vacant lot projects throughout the neighborhood, one on Pitkin Avenue and Berryman Street, along with Cypress Hills Local Development Corporation. So we revitalized a 10,000 square foot vacant lot into a really vibrant art space. So we had already had an experience doing it, and so with additional resources to make something very great happen, we just took a shot at it.
Does a neighborhood like East New York that wants development but fears displacement from gentrification have an ambivalent community with the arts and artists? Because often it's artists who move in first to areas considered low income because they can afford to live there, a lot of white artists, and then the gentrification follows them.
Right. Well, what we're finding now is that, and it's so interesting, I haven't seen a lot of the gentrification as yet. What we are seeing are artists that live in the neighborhood that have worked nationally and internationally, or some famous, some not, are discovering us. And then wanting to do work within the neighborhood. So, and one of the things that I am really adamant about is making sure that our artists work with youth in the neighborhood, work with community residents to install work publicly throughout the community. We need to really create more of an imprint or an infrastructure in the neighborhood. You should be able to walk down the street and know who lives here. You should be able to walk down and know the history of this community. And so we want to do that, but we want to do it with the community at the table as well, with the artists.
And does art break a stereotype in a sense?
It does. It breaks a stereotype about this neighborhood. This neighborhood has been stereotyped for so long as somewhere that you just don't want to go. It's not a destination. It's just something's going to happen to you, and it's so not the case. It's a neighborhood who has residents that have been around for a long time, through the good and the bad, and these people have stuck together throughout all of the years. Without resources from the city, with resources from the city, we've been here, and it's a beautiful, low-dense area. You can still see the sunlight. It almost doesn't look like Brooklyn at some point. Some people who have not been to the neighborhood.
Because it's so low-rise.
It's so low-rise. It's low density. So you can still see your neighbors. You still have grass and backyards. And so they're surprised to see East New York in this way.
So are you making a pitch here also for immigrant artists who can't afford Williamsburg anymore or Soho or wherever?
Well, they're welcome. We're not a community that shuns away people. Folks are always welcome to come to the community and discover us and work with us. We just ask that that they do work with community members and make sure that they are at the table. All too often we see international artists come into a community and do something, and it just pops out of nowhere. It's always beautiful and breathtaking, but it also brings about a change that this was not did not have the community members at the table.
Is there another neighborhood in New York that serves as a good model for what you want to happen in East New York? Because there are, frankly, enough bad models to go around.
Absolutely. I quite honestly, no, I have not seen a model like this. I mean, I look to communities like Harlem, but the gentrification has taken place there. But when you go to Harlem and you walk the streets, you still feel the essence of that community. You can still learn about the rich history of that neighborhood. Same thing in Bed-Stuy, I would say. You can still walk the streets and know exactly, what the history was, who the neighbors are, and get that sense. We want the same thing for the East New York community, but again, we want to make sure that the community residents are not forced out. So
what's the next step? Do you want anybody who's viewing this right now to contact you with anything in particular?
Absolutely. Make sure you contact us. We have events going on at the Read New Lot site. It's going to be happening until October of this year. We're trying to push for longer, but we are here. We're here Monday through Saturday, 10 to 9, support the vendors. We really want them to be successful in this endeavor. So.
New Lots in Snedeker.
New Lots in Snedeker.
Nearest subway stop is?
L stop at New Lots Avenue train station.
Thank you for coming in. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Time for Public Intellectual, where we look at new research with the power to change minds and public policy. In 2010, the Citizens United Supreme Court decision permitted corporations, and unions too, to directly advocate for political candidates and participate in political debate, as if they were people. This worries many who feel the decision corrupts our democracy and that the First Amendment is there to protect individuals' free speech, not corporate free speech and big spending. According to research from our next guest, the use of the First Amendment by corporations, a relatively recent practice, is increasing and bad not just for people, but for the economy. Joining us via Skype from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard law professor and former corporate lawyer, John Coates. Hello from New York, Professor Coates.
Brian, thanks for having me.
What were you setting out to count in your study?
I wanted to focus initially on the Supreme Court and on the rest of the federal courts to see how frequently businesses had been using the First Amendment to pursue any kind of a claim, but particularly going after regulation, trying to get rid of regulation under the First Amendment. Under
the First Amendment's free speech guarantee?
Yes, that was the focus. This was not focused so much on religion. This was a speech-focused study.
So we'll talk eventually about what effect you think this increase is having and why you think it's bad. But I want to put up a chart from your study that shows the increase over time in corporations using the First Amendment in these cases. So tell us what we're looking at here.
So this is a plot of the number of cases under the First Amendment. I smoothed it out because it jumps around year by year. This is a moving 5-year average in the Supreme Court from the first such case through the current period.
What was the first such case, and why are we seeing Justice Lewis Powell's name in this chart?
Well, the lines that bracket the big rise up basically represent Lewis Powell's tenure on the Supreme Court.
Which, remind us who don't happen to be constitutional scholars when that was?
Yeah, he joined the court in the early 70s and left in the late 80s. He was really the only corporate lawyer, true corporate lawyer, to be on the Supreme Court in the modern era.
And you describe him as sort of a constitutional entrepreneur. Is that the term you use in the study?
It is. He's a business lawyer, so familiar with entrepreneurialism, and he took that spirit, I think, to his term on the Supreme Court. He wrote a memo for the Chamber of Commerce before he went on the court, outlining a strategy to try to get the courts to pursue business ends. And I think he pursued that once he was on the bench.
Have these primarily been Citizens United type cases, that is, the First Amendment right of corporations to spend on politics?
No, I think initially it was a broader set of goals, and those broader goals have continued through today. It includes political spending, but it also covers things like commercial speech, just advertising, or resisting disclosure requirements to consumers. Anything that involves communication under the First Amendment by a business is part of the agenda.
So it's gone up, took a little dip there for a while, and then went back up according to your curve. But what implication do you think this has for the economy as well as for democracy?
Well, I think it's troubling. I think it's troubling because I think it's part of a broader unfortunate trend towards businesses seeking profit not by creating new products or generating services that people value, but by pursuing political and legal goals, trying to extract rents from the society as a whole. Rents meaning essentially transfer payments, trying to get money from either other businesses that they're rivals with or, unfortunately, increasingly from consumers.
So this is a kind of crony capitalism, to use a current phrase?
It is. Crony capitalism, I think, conveys often that somebody individually is capturing benefits, often through a corrupt relationship between the government and business. I don't think we're quite in that world yet. We're not quite to Russia or to Indonesia or to another country commonly labeled that way. But I do think the use of the court system as a way to make money is a version of a corrupt capitalist system.
So what's an example of businesses making more money from consumers, one of the categories you listed, as a result of a Supreme Court decision giving it First Amendment speech rights?
Yeah, one that I'll mention a couple. One in the paper I focus on is a case involving the pomegranate juice, which for a while was selling consumers on the idea that it had all kinds of wonderful health benefits. It's now had to retract many of those claims. But one thing it did win on was the ability to point to one study that it found, in fact, helped commission, to sell the idea of health benefits. The FTC was seeking to have the company qualify the claim by saying it was an initial study, since it was only one. And the D.C. Circuit, under the First Amendment, under Supreme Court precedent, said that that was an unjustifiable restriction on POM's ability to communicate. So it can now just say there are scientific studies, I guess it can't say plural, there is science backing up its claims to health benefits. Another one, maybe even higher salience that I don't emphasize in the paper, but worth noting, is the tobacco companies have resisted having graphic warning labels put on cigarette packages, which is what most countries do. Not here, because the Supreme Court found that that was in essence, an intrusion on the right of the tobacco companies to communicate that was not backed up sufficiently in the court's view by cost-benefit analysis.
Of course, the Supreme Court is very selective in what cases it takes, so you looked at some lower court rulings too, right?
I did. I was a little uncomfortable just relying on the Supreme Court. Sometimes it announces a ruling and then other people don't make it back to the Supreme Court for a long time. So I looked at the circuit courts, which is the next layer down in the federal system. And if anything, the trend there is even more striking. It's simply straight up over time. It's also something that is different than other areas of law where the Supreme Court has created new rights. I looked at rights of criminal defendants. I looked at Roe v. Wade. And while you did see an immediate flurry of cases in the lower courts after those famous decisions, you don't see the permanent trend upwards over time that you see in the First Amendment area. Basically, since 1978, the number of circuit court cases involving First Amendment claims by businesses has gone steadily up.
So for people who are concerned about this trend, if these are Supreme Court rulings, by and large, which means they're interpreting the Constitution, would it take a constitutional amendment in order to rectify this trend?
Well, that would clearly be one way to go. It's, of course, difficult to get constitutional amendments passed, part of the good and the bad with our Constitution. Another route is many of these decisions can be modified and narrowed over time. I took a little bit of heart from Hobby Lobby, ironically, even though I didn't particularly like the outcome. There was language in the opinion by Justice Alito that suggested he would be more cautious about extending generally First Amendment rights to publicly held companies.
That, of course, was the case that allowed some companies to not give contraceptive coverage under Obamacare if the owners hold certain religious views opposed to them?
Correct. And in that case, the companies were closely held. They were owned by just a few people, all in one family, all of whom had, by concession of the government, strong religious views. What the court sort of said was, we're not sure whether the same reasoning here would apply to a company like Exxon, even if the CEO, for example, was a religious person.
So I guess yet to be determined at the Supreme Court whether small private companies have more free speech rights than big public ones. Professor Coates, thank you very much for enlightening us on this with your research.
Thank you for having me.
That's Public Intellectual for today. It's spring in New York City, which means the Baltimore Orioles are flying into town. For a change, I am not thinking about baseball, but rather actual birds migrating via the Central Park stopover. That's next. Imagine this, you're a tiny bird, a warbler perhaps, headed north at night along the Atlantic Flyway. At dawn, you pass over Manhattan and spot one huge rectangle of green, Central Park. Naturally, you swoop down for a day or two to rest and feed before you move on. You land in a small wooded area called the Ramble that provides a lot of cover, insects and seeds to eat, water to drink and bathe in. All this is why it's so great to go birding in Central Park right now, because the number of birds and the number of species are just so concentrated, far more than you would see if you went wandering around the countryside all day. But no need to wander or carry binoculars right now, because to take us on a virtual walk in the park, we are joined by Paul Sweet, Collections Manager in the Department of Ornithology at the American Museum of Natural History. The photos we will see are courtesy of Lloyd Spotalnik, but welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Brian.
And before we go to these slides of different birds that you might actually see in New York City, why are they all stopping here?
Well, they really don't have much choice a lot of times. When the sun comes up and they need to come down, they don't fly during the day. As you said in your introduction, they see this little oasis in the middle of all the concrete, and that's where they go.
So New York is not a destination for many?
For most of them, no. It's mostly a passage. It's a place that they stop over on their way to going where they're going. Their breeding grounds to the north.
So they winter in the Caribbean and they summer in Canada. A lot of these birds, really.
Yeah, that would fit the bill.
No time in the temperate climate except a few days stopover. All right, let's look at a bird. This one is called the black-crowned night heron, right?
Correct, the black-crowned night heron. So there've been a lot of these hanging around Central Park, around the lake recently. They do nest in New York City on some of the islands in the East River. And they're curious-looking birds. They, as their name suggests, they mostly are nocturnal. They do a lot of hunting in the nighttime. And by day, we can usually see them roosting in trees around the lake.
All right, viewers, so if you've seen this bird and didn't know what it is, now you know it's a black-crowned night heron. Next bird, the northern yellow-shafted flicker.
Yeah, the flicker is a kind of woodpecker. It's one of our larger woodpeckers. It's a pretty impressive bird. It's got some pretty good, nice markings. It's got the red V on the back of the neck, and the male here has the little black mustache. And the cool thing is when the underwings and the undertail are a bright golden yellow color, and it's a very pretty woodpecker. It's also pretty noisy. You can hear them calling a lot.
But that's not a flicker. What's this?
Well, that is probably one of my favorite bird songs, the wood thrush, a very ethereal, fluty kind of song that you can hear around the New York area in good woodlands during our summertime. And occasionally, if you're lucky, you get to hear them in Central Park. They're sort of warming up for their breeding grounds.
At this time of year.
Yeah, they're not quite here yet.
Yeah. Do they wind up in the Adirondacks? Because I've spent a lot in there.
Yeah, they could
and
be
that was a very familiar sound to me, though I don't recognize the bird.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they're hard to see when they're in the woods, but yeah, that's a very typical sound of the woodlands around this area.
Now, for the birders among us, the sound is actually key to getting ready then to spot a bird, right?
Exactly. At this time of year, the trees are really coming into leaf, and these tiny little birds are quite hard to see. And if they weren't singing, you might miss them. So it's often good to listen out for their song. Like this common yellowthroat, the male common yellowthroat here, they tend to kind of hide in low vegetation, and you often discover them by their song.
How do they get so pretty? Does evolution just select for cute?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. The warblers have it, particularly good. Some of the birds are not quite as pretty as them. But that's why we all go to Central Park in the spring to see these little ones.
We go from the yellow to the orange and black, red and black?
So, yeah, pink, orangey color. Yeah, this is a beautiful picture by Lloyd Spitalnik of the American redstart. This is the male, the black with the orange patches. Again, this is a bird that will just be passing through the park, but it does breed in pretty close proximity to the city.
And let's look at a bird with no color at all other than black and white.
Yeah, this is a cutie. This is the black and white warbler. British people like to think of it as a flying humbug, which is a kind of a candy, like a black and white striped candy. They occasionally show up over there. It's kind of a creeper. It creeps around on tree trunks. You might see it in the park, and you can often get pretty close to them during migration.
And just very cute head and eye and beak and the whole thing. Where's he going, by the way?
He could be going nearby in nice forest, but also way up into Canada. They're a pretty widespread breeding range.
Did you say they fly? They do their migration flying at night?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I didn't realize that. So when it's dark out,
they're flying.
They're flying,
and that's why New York, as well as being Central Park, is a great place for them to rest. But getting to New York or through big cities is very perilous for them. They can hit big buildings. Many die when they'll hit skyscrapers that are lit at night. So, that nocturnal migration does have its perils.
Are there fewer birds to see then in the day? Is this why people go birding at dawn and at dusk?
Dawn is probably the best time because the birds they've been flying all night. They're sort of moving around. They're trying to find somewhere to spend the day. They're hungry. So early morning is really the best time. But by the time it gets warm at midday, they're sort of slowed down in their activity. Yeah.
And how are they affected, if they are, by all the pigeons in New York?
I don't think the pigeons are going to bother them at all. The pigeons are good hawk food. That's about all I can say about them.
And it used to be that passenger pigeons would darken the sky.
Yeah, well, that's, we're going back a long way now. Passenger pigeons have been extinct for well over 100. I mean, the last one died in captivity 100 years ago, but the big flocks were way back in the 19th century.
And it was technology that killed them, right?
It was, yeah. I mean, the combination of the railroad and the telegraph, shotguns, allowed market hunters to get out there into the woods, find out where they were breeding, and then ship them back to the markets in New York and Chicago and the big cities of the East.
Wait, what did the telegraph have to do with survival of bird species?
Well, if you had to wait for a piece of mail to come by the Pony Express or whatever happened before that, it might be days before you found out about where these birds were, and they'd be gone. But with the telegraph, like sending an email, the guys can get on the train and head out to the woods of Wisconsin and find these big nesting groups.
For hunters?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So are all bird species in decline now with today's communications technology being instant?
Well, I don't think in most places we're not actively persecuting birds for food, although that does happen.
Right. We're not hunting these cute little warblers.
No, but in Europe, in the Mediterranean, actually, there's quite a big problem with trapping of migrating songbirds in places like Cyprus and Malta. And if you ever read Jonathan Franzen's wrote an essay about that recently.
No, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Do we have more forest now and less farmland than we did maybe decades ago?
Well, in this region, yeah, a lot of our farmland has sort of returned to woodland. Of course, other parts of the world, it's the opposite. In Amazonia or Southeast Asia, a lot of forest is being cut down for timber and then converted into agribusiness like oil palm or soybean or something like that. So habitat loss is pretty significant and of course these birds that we have here, we just have their summer home. Their winter home is in Mexico or in Cuba or in Venezuela, and they have to deal with a completely different set of conditions down there.
All right, in our remaining time, we're going to try to go through 10 bird slides
All right,
real fast.
let's do it.
So think of this as the right lightning round, and we'll see how fast you can name these birds.
This is a chestnut-sided warbler, very cute bird, golden-winged warbler. This is a kind of a rarity, hardly ever seen in Central Park, but it nests in small numbers near New York City, but it's a very much a declining species. Magnolia warbler, we'll see lots of those in Central Park in the next month. Cerulean, another declining and rare bird that we could see in Central Park occasionally. This is a rusty blackbird, again, a declining species. We get these in early spring, hanging around the sort of the wet.
Look at the little specks of rust color.
There you go. There you spotted that. Yeah, it's kind of like a grackle, but a little different. There's our Baltimore Oriole that you mentioned at the beginning.
Baseball cap.
It's the male Baltimore Oriole, and another gorgeous bird, the scarlet tanager, and the indigo bunting, another spectacular little songbird from. And today I saw those in Central Park. Rose-breasted grosbeaks was the first day I'd seen them this year, and the ubiquitous white-throated sparrow that's all over the park all through the winter and until sort of about this time of year. That's a eastern towhee taking a bath. Lloyd caught this one while he was bathing. And is that
10 for 10?
10 for 10. There you go.
You're around the table. You know your birds.
All right. Well, should.
So where should people go, and for how long, to see kind of the best concentrated birding experience?
Well, this time of the year, you can't go wrong by heading towards the Ramble. There's a lot of other birders in there. If you want to know where things are, you can ask people. There's kind of a mob scene in there in May.
Other good parks around the
Absolutely.
5 boroughs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Best ones?
I mean, Van Cortlandt and Prospect is great. Greenwood Cemetery. I'm not actually that familiar with Queens and Staten Island, but I'm sure any of the parks. I think
there's a lot of
parks there are
just
good. Yeah.
Thanks. That was great.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week at this hour, and do tune into my radio program weekday mornings from 10 a.m. to noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, former Congressman Barney Frank. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.